Democracy is not lost. It's dead. We now have people voting for change in their countries that don't even live there. 2 years a representative has to show their stuff before they have to show their stuff again and again and again. If they succeed does not depend on ability, but rather on smarts. Go with what every other representative in your party feels, because you are only one of 400 plus, and if you vote your conscience, you are out the door. You have those that believe that their ideas are new and original, but in fact these ideas are given them by the lobbyists and constituents back home with their wallets and purses open. The Senate is no better, because you have 6 years and fewer members to convince your ideas for the economy is better. But you don't know how to navigate between the rich and poor. You either believe that giving the money to the rich will build jobs and opportunity, allowing the trickle-down theory to take effect, or you believe that giving the money to the poor will suddenly generate job opportunities. Unfortunately, the international treaties you pass are not intended to generate jobs in America, but rather in some far-off country that's democracy still depends on which end of the weapon they use to protect the ballot boxes. We repeat the past. We repeat history only because someone else tells us it is safer than to confront the future with unexplored ideas. Our country is being raped from the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives because they don't know the difference between conservative, moderate, and liberal. They think that each amendment to the Constitution stands alone, and that's not a truth, because they might be printed separate to establish a sequence, but in actuality they form as a whole, with none having more power than the other does. Goons throwing grievances around such taxation without representation, but never understanding that they are the ones that have to negotiate with every other state for the revenue available to make America stronger. But the more they say it, makes them believe that they are making a difference and not just bogging the whole system down. Unfortunately for the average American, these politicians desiring to tote the power have weakened our country by weakening our defense. So the first of many politicians are headed towards the door of the chamber to establish a quorum. But it appears as if when one politician enters the room, they are not seen again, but no one shows concern as one after another follows suit. The halls of Congress have suddenly become small Bermuda triangles, but the mystery surrounding the return of their associates is quickly solved, because once they themselves enter the room, they look at the other politicians standing there in shock. But each chamber is affected in a different way. The seats, for instance, in the Senate have suddenly changed from party to region. They are only made of wood, but the signs have been changed. The marks on the desktop scratched into the wood over the last 200 years have been relocated to another desktop, or the desktop has been physically removed from one and placed on another. The maintenance crew has been investigated, but they were not in the Senate areas at all in the last several days. And the vacuums and mops utilized by the cleaning crew have no way to make these renovations. So mystery aside, the maintenance crews have been authorized to replace the desk in their original locations. Someone, though, did have another thought that would be less time-consuming, and that is to simply change the signs back and leave the desktops as they are. Unfortunately, screwdrivers break, scrapers snap in two, and even those that try tearing at the state signage find that they are fastened tightly to the desk with some sort of adhesive stronger than epoxy. Finally, though, someone has the idea to just paste over the sign with the newer sign on top. But that lasts only seconds, because the moment people walk away from the job, the old signage bleeds through. And by the time it is done, there is no evidence that a second sign ever existed. The maintenance crew came and went as they returned to their departments to facilitate other ideas. The doors slowly closed as they went, but for the moment no one thought anything other out of place. The room is now left to the politicians, not exactly eager to start the day's discussions, because today there's going to be a lot of yelling and angst. One side of the aisle is rejecting the other side. Do we give a fish or buy a shovel for our poor? Who in this country should be responsible for someone living or dying? People in other countries live in shacks. Why not ours? The senators' noses were put out of joint. Why maintenance couldn't repair an obvious crime by vandals was intolerable. Why security couldn't handle this attack on the greatest chamber in the world was reprehensible. And in the minds of all involved is the obvious agitation. We have no reason to sit next to someone of another party. We might live in the same region, share the same territorial concerns, but what happens in one community does not make it palatable in another. Education, health, and welfare, and common concerns do not cross boundaries. If you are part of our party, great. If you aren't, then that is your problem, not ours. The representatives' problems wasn't as bad, but in some ways debilitating, because someone took the words no and yes printed broadly in their political manifesto and reconfigured them. So when the majority and minority leaders asked them to answer a question in a sincere, upstanding manner, they had to fiddle for an answer, and never did their answer appear right. Were they going to have to go to a tutorial class this weekend? Their problem was solved because someone had the idea to write the word yes on the politician's right hand and no on the left hand. And hopefully when they are asked a question, they are faced in the right direction. The congressmen and senators, feeling a little annoyed at the unanticipated disruption in their daily routine, head for their prospective chamber doors. They will come back when the maintenance crews return and the problem is resolved. Some vandal believe they had a point to make, but in actuality they did more to disrupt valuable legislation that each party held dear. But the smugness disappears when the first representative and the first senator reaches the chamber doors, because neither doors would open. Desperate men and women who could sit through hours of filibusters suddenly fall apart once their own liberty is compromised by a matter of minutes. And as insignificant a gesture as the door opening might be, the legislators find that every door is affected and would not open. And these are some of the doors that the maintenance crews walked through moments before. And if you could detail only one direct connection between both chambers, it would be that the maintenance personnel of each walked out at the same time of 11:57 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. But when the politicians call the maintenance department for their personnel to return, they are met with a disturbing telephone response. The number you called is no longer in service. But twice more the politician tries, but with the same results. And other politicians try, but did it more to showcase their success over the first politician's failure. Unfortunately, success was not to be had. So Homeland Security was called, but they are not as met with total disbelief. Finally, though, the Speaker of the House gets on the phone to instruct a superior at Homeland Security that this is not a crank call and he didn't appreciate being talked to like a common criminal. At this point, the country's security arm felt this is a legitimate claim and would have personnel there as soon as there was a break in the weather. Thoughts of conspiracy and threat soon pervade the room. Was this a thinly veiled terrorist act to show the politicians the ineptness of their actions? Unfortunately, the bravado shared by a lot of the congressmen is crushed by a simple inanimate object. A doorknob will not turn. To save face and pretend that the actions experienced this day didn't matter, some politicians started going back to their seats. But a Texas senator had no intention of sitting at a desk that was his appropriate seating assignment yesterday, but now espouses signage of an Oregon member that vied from a different party and different beliefs. So for one day at least, he will sit at a desk across the aisle and political divide. Other members also followed suit, and soon 100 members of the Senate are seated regionally and not politically. Instead of talking party politics with their surrounding chambermates, they actually have to talk about regional concerns. All communications, though, is stopped as the lights in the two chambers suddenly go dark. But the politicians sit still because what had started out as the unusual has quickly become the norm. And when the lights return to the chambers, the coldness appears on each politician's face because they are looking down at what appears to be a hologram of 3 words displayed on their desktops or the seat in front of them. And no one had the time to enter the room to write this epitaph. So with great concern, they consider the wisdom of the words written there in a bold font. Do or die.